Thank you all for coming. This is the question and answer session for the LPSC session chair and moderator training. I think you all received a link to a video that we made that went over the basic procedures, but this is a chance for you to ask questions. My name is Walter Kiefer from LPI. I am one of the chairs of the program committee, and Justin Filiberto from the NASA Johnson Space Center is the other program committee chair, and he's here to help answer questions as well. Jamie Shambera, who's the operations manager at LPI and is doing a lot for meeting logistics, is here. And between us, we will do our best to answer all of your questions. And so this really is your time. Let me just suggest that people raise their hands and then ask the questions, because I'm not going to attempt to go through what was in the slides again. I'm assuming you've seen them. But I will answer questions or defer them to somebody else as is appropriate. So it's your program, people.
Please feel free to unmute yourselves. You can also put something in chat, but probably easier if you just, like Walter said, raise your hand, unmute.
Chris.
Hello. So in the slides, it says that if there is a technical issue, the time taken to solve the technical issue will take the time of the presentation. If there's 10 minutes and the issue took 5 minutes, then there's only 5 minutes left for the presentation. But what if there is just so much time on the technical issue that there is just not possible to give the presentation? Is there flexibility to give that presentation in the question and answer part or the discussion of the panel?
Jamie, I'd like to defer to you. You probably have a stronger opinion about this than I do.
Well, I would like to say that certainly won't happen. Surely it won't happen, but it's technology. I suppose that it could. I can't answer the question if the presentation could be given during the Q&A session. So Walter and Justin, I think that one really is up to you, but we would certainly do everything that we could to make sure that the technical issue is resolved as swiftly as possible. I mean, it's hard for me to say that 100% guarantee that it would be and that person would have enough time left over, but we would do what we could. And I'm going to leave the second part to Walter and Justin.
Okay, I guess my answer. Okay, go ahead, Justin, please.
I was going to say I'm happy to jump in, and the answer is no. We can't accommodate in the question and answer, at least from my perspective, because it's taking away from question and answer to all of the speakers, because we have the talks binned at 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, and then a Q&A for all of them. If you give that time to a speaker, it's then taking away from all of the others as well. And the schedule is so tightly packed, and even from room to room to room, that we need to stay on schedule. So unfortunately, no, technical glitches can't really be accommodated other places.
And I guess my answer would be is that in all the years I've been attending LPSC, I've not seen a glitch that was that bad. I mean, yes, it can take a couple of minutes, and maybe Murphy's Law is going to bite me because I'm saying this now, but typically our AV techs are very good about getting things moving again. In years past, the worst glitches I remember seeing were when people tried to bring up talks on their own personal laptops, and that's not possible in our current setup. So the biggest point of failure has been taken away. If things ran late by 1 minute, I would be okay if everything shifted by 1 minute and the last talk ended up 1 minute into the Q&A. But Justin's right, we can't take 10 minutes out of a 20-minute Q&A and give it to a speaker. In the first place, people wouldn't know where to find it. And in the second place, it then becomes unfair to everybody. But I don't think it's a problem, because we typically do not have issues that are that bad. Okay, Brittany Symes.
Hi, question about the LPSC ambassador microbloggers. In the training video, it said that the ambassadors will share content on the web unless the presenter has explicitly asked to not have their work shared. But then also the training says that ambassadors can photograph presentations, but only after seeking presenter permission. So could you please clarify what is permission? Is this permission through omission or expressly seeking permission?
Fair question. So it is in fact up to individual speakers to say that they do not want their work blogged about. We have in years past provided a graphic that was basically a no camera graphic. Jamie, am I remembering that correctly? Is that going to be available on our website so that people can indicate they don't want their work to be blogged about?
We hadn't planned for that, so let me look into it.
Okay. I mean, I'm not trying to create extra work for you. I'm trying to avoid creating an expectation on behalf of the session chairs that you were not prepared to meet. I think if a blogger, maybe we need to put this in the rules that get read at the beginning. Maybe we need to include that. But I think if a blogger or an ambassador, as we're calling them this year, were to take a picture, I think that they still would be expected to explicitly ask permission to post the picture. It's one thing to tweet and say, look, I just heard this fabulous talk by blank about the following. I think that's acceptable unless the person says they don't want any coverage. And we all know that there are probably a few papers that are pending in high profile journals where people don't want that kind of coverage. It's a different matter, in my view, to be taking pictures of people's results and tweeting them out. I think that only should be done with the explicit permission. And I think maybe what we need to do is look to see what is in the rules that will be read at the beginning of each session and clarify it there.
Hi, Caitlin McCain. Going to be a session moderator. Do you have an idea of what were the most common technical issues last year? Because that was a partially remote LPSC as well. So what were the most common technical errors, and what should we be anticipating dealing with?
Jamie, I'm going to turn this again back to you. You were the one who dealt with most of those things, or you or your staff. Do you have anything you'd like to say?
Offhand, I don't remember a lot of technical issues. I know we did have a pervasive issue with, I'll call it the fuzzy slide issue. And we finally figured out what the problem was, and we have that resolved for this year. So that should not be a problem. We do have a lot of remote presenters, and this is not a technical issue, but they'll say that they have not received the link, the Zoom webinar link in an email when they actually have. And so it takes some time to resend that to them, since it is a unique link, but that's not a technical issue. It's just, it happens fairly often.
And I think it behooves everybody, whether they're session chairs or moderators or the presenters, if they're going to be remote, log in early. Don't come charging into the session 30 seconds in advance and expect everything's going to go smoothly, because sometimes things are problems. And we encourage everybody to be available like 15 minutes in advance. And the speakers will have a login that lets them get in separately from the general audience, so that will let them have things tested out. If somebody chooses to only show up 1 minute in advance, assuming that everything will work perfectly, and they're, say, the first speaker, that kind of is on them.
And there will also be some opportunities for testing that all oral presenters can take advantage of.
Justin, I see you went on off mic or on mic. You want to say something else?
I was going to say the biggest thing that I saw last year was everything that Walter and Jamie just said, which is people jumping on Zoom at the last minute and not testing out their connection and having connection issues. And there's nothing we can sort of do to prevent that. We need people to actually log in as early as they can and make sure that they have good enough Wi-Fi. Obviously, Wi-Fi comes and goes sometimes in places, even in my house. And so it may go down, but that is definitely one place. The other thing that came up a lot, and we'll talk about at each session chair breakfast, is people wanting to use laser pointers in the room, but people online cannot see laser pointers. And so just something to remember that anything you do in the room, the online audience may not be able to see.
So I'm seeing a question in the chat that asked if online attendees will be able to ask questions anonymously, or will a name always be shown? So Jamie has answered and say attendees will be able to ask questions anonymously, and the system allows upvoting. So it may end up being a question from a bunch of people that all kind of concur on a particular question. We actually do like it if people will say who they are. We, this science should not be done anonymously. And if you're in the room, we ask people to identify who they are and where they're from. People in the room might think, well, everybody can see me, but of course, the online people will not. And so it will be important for people to say that. And so, ideally, I would ask that people are asking questions online the same way, but recognizing that if people have done upvoting, the question will be an aggregate in any event. Okay, Chris, I see a hand up again.
Yes, thanks. So if a presentation is withdrawn, the training video mentions something about discussing the presentation. I don't know if that means the previous presentation or the one that was withdrawn. And also, I personally would prefer to just wait for the next presentation. So can you just mention a little bit of the specifics of what happens if a presentation is withdrawn?
Sure. So the key thing for us, as we talked about at the beginning, is we need to keep everything running on time. We can't start talks early because then people will miss them. People will be joining in late, or they will be coming in from another room, and then they'll miss it. So we can't start a talk early just because a previous talk was canceled. And there are very few cancellations. It will probably happen once or twice, but it is not a common occurrence. In that instance, obviously you can't ask for a discussion of that particular paper, but you could have discussion of papers that have already been presented. That kind of forces the people who have been there to have an extended Q&A, which is a little bit hard on them. I've been subject to that before. Or I suppose as a session chair, you could actually pose a question that you think is relevant to the overall topic of the session and ask people to kind of talk about that for the next 10 minutes. It's kind of up to you, but the one thing you cannot do is start the first talk early, the next talk early, because that means people will miss it. And so I see something coming up. This results in unequal treatment of in-person versus remote attendees. And the answer is, I don't think so, because people could be putting things into the Q&A function. And I'm trying to be clear, we don't call it chat when we're using the Zoom webinar, it'll be called Q&A. And people can put Q&A in that discussion, just like they would use if they were in the room going to a mic. And so the reason we have added a moderator in addition to the 2 session chairs is to allow for someone to be monitoring the microphones in the room and someone to be monitoring what's coming in online and trying to give as much as we can equal treatment to both online and in-person participants. That's the intent. That's why we've added a third person to the crew that is running the session, 2 session chairs and a moderator, is to try and make this as equal as possible, given what's coming in both in the Q&A function and in the room.
Okay, sorry. So just related to that question, what I meant by waiting for the next presentation is just like have like quiet time for, the 10 minutes that was assigned to the presentation that was withdrawn, instead of like having this discussion. And I don't know if that's like optional and left to the chairs, or we have to do a discussion.
I think it's preferable to try and keep the discussion going with some kind of material that's relevant to the session if it's possible. And I realize that puts a little bit of extra pressure on the chairs to do something on the fly. As I say, it doesn't come up often, but it does come up occasionally. The problem is if you simply ask people to just sit and wait quietly for 10 minutes, is people may wander out and not wander back, and then that becomes unfair in a different way to the person who follows. We're trying, these situations are not optimal for anybody, and so we're trying to balance out as best we can, giving reasonable attention to the talk that's following, and not shortchanging anybody.
So just to follow up on what Walter said, last year the anonymous questions online were coming in real time to the speakers. So if there is a 10-minute break, go to the online questions. There may be already some in there that can get you thinking or get a discussion started to go for it. And then to follow up as well about the inequity between the in-person and online questions. This is something that's probably one of the most difficult things for the session chairs, because someone runs to the microphone and will start speaking before you even look at them. And so you need to keep control of the room to make sure that it's not just the people at the microphone that are getting questions asked, but that you do go back and forth, or take a couple from online and a couple from in-room, however works best for you to keep control, but make sure that the people at the microphone don't just assume that they can start talking and ask their questions before you give the okay.
Right, thanks,
And
Justin.
Justin, that kind of plays nicely into a question that Hannes Bernhardt has about the moderator. Is the moderator responsible for in-person questions at the microphones? The slides just mentioned the online Q&A, if I remember correctly. So Justin, I thought that was a nice lead in if you.
Sure. So how I used Moderator last year was they were in charge of keeping track of the questions that were coming in online only. And they were a great voice to say, hey, don't forget the questions online, or just start asking the question from online. And they're sort of your reality check to make sure you're not just letting the people in the room ask questions, but to jump in and be like, we also have a question online. My moderator was great because they didn't pull the questions necessarily always in order, but sometimes it was a follow-on to the question in the room, or would use the questions online to pivot to one of the speakers who didn't get a question before, because that way you can sort of target questions to people and make sure that all 4 of your speakers get time to answer questions and actively participate in the discussion.
Right, okay. So I see that there's an online question, online comment from Stephen. Says that the in-person chair advances the slide. So if there's one in-person chair and one remote person, does that mean that the in-person chair has to advance their own slides? And I guess it could turn out that way.
Hey, Walter, if I can, I'll take this one.
Go ahead.
The session chairs, the in-person session chairs only need to advance slides for the remote presenters.
Oh, right. Thank you.
So
yes, I was about to
in-person presenters will pick up the slide at a presentation remote advancer and do it themselves when they're up at the podium. So it doesn't completely answer your question, just a quick clarification. Let's see. So I think, and Walter and Justin can chime in, there's an important part of the instructions that we sent you that says the 3 of you need to communicate. So session chairs and moderator for each session before LPSC get together, talk about how you want to handle such a scenario that Stephen puts into the chat, where there might be some sort of conflict, and see how you might best be able to manage it. All session chairs and moderators will also have access to a spreadsheet that will tell them in advance, as much as possible, how each presenter is attending, whether they are in person or if they are remote, and that will help you with your planning. I'm going to try to send that to you as late as possible, so it's as up to date as we can make it, but you will have access to that.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. Margaret.
Wait, Peter has
Okay,
a follow-up question, and Jamie hit on this in her answer previously. If you are giving a talk in your session and you're either a moderator or a chair, just talk to the other two people up there and have one of them cover for that portion. There's 3 of you. We know people are giving talks. Hopefully you're all not giving a talk in the same bundle. We did ask people to plan that to make sure they weren't. But just have people switch roles to cover other aspects during your sort of block of talks.
Right, and remember, again, with the online question, remember that while you're giving the presentation, you're not worried about the questions that are coming in, because that will be held for the group Q&A at the end of a group of 4. And so yes, they're even more than normal in this circumstance. It requires coordination amongst the 2 chairs and the moderator. It used to be that when everybody was in person and you had 2 chairs, you could get together 5 minutes beforehand. You could have everything worked out, and it was cool. It more or less amounted to who was going to do the first half, who was going to do the second half. This requires more thinking. And so we really are hoping that each group of 3, the 2 chairs and the moderator for a session, will do some planning in advance. If you're chairing a session on Monday, hopefully you will have had some conversation amongst the 3 of you before the meeting. If you're doing it on Thursday, maybe you can wait and do it during the meeting. But we do want you, we would like you to actually do some coordination in advance. Okay, Margaret.
Hi, I'm also a moderator, and I just wanted to clarify the Zoom environment. Are the only way Zoom attendees going to be able to communicate with me through the Q&A, or will they be able to unmute their mics?
They
Only
will
through
not
Q&A, and they will not be able to unmute their mics.
Okay,
Right.
thank you.
That's why it's important for people to connect. If you're a presenter, it's important for them to connect via the special link that they're given, because that gives them speaker privileges, or the AV text can move them up, I believe. But if you just log in as a regular attendee, even if you think you're going to give the talk that way, you will not be able to use your mic. This is the only way we can control things, because if 200 people could all turn on their mics at one time, it would be pandemonium. So this is a tool for the chairs and the moderator to be able to keep control of the room. Stephen.
So if you're a chair and a speaker, do you get 2 links that give you voice privileges, or do you just have one?
Presumably one, but I'll defer to Jamie.
Just one.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just
Brittany.
wondering.
Sorry.
I'm
Go
sorry.
ahead, Christian.
I'm just
ahead.
wondering, is every session the same, like that there is an online and in-person chair plus a moderator, or is it like mixed, where there could be any combination of online and in-person?
The only thing that we have tried to be sure of is that we want there to be at least one chair in the room. And that was certainly true with what people told us their plans were when they submitted their abstracts. Now, people's plans may change, and we may be scrambling in some cases at the last minute. We certainly were last year. If it turns out that 2 chairs and a moderator are all in the room, that's fine. We don't require there to be anybody remote. There's no benefit for people being remote, although it does give us a broader pool of participation, and we like that. But it is important to have at least one person in the room to help control advancing of slides and to call people at the microphone and such. That's really the only requirement that we have, is that we have at least one person physically present. And if it turns out we have a problem with that, we sometimes have to scramble at the last minute.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, Brittany, you've been patient. Your turn.
That's okay. Speaking of scrambling at the last minute, something that came up last year, I think you mentioned, was presenters changing from in person to remote, and they didn't have the link to enter the meeting. And this was a problem. We were scrambling, but also the session chairs weren't informed of this change. Is the best mechanism for kind of dealing with this problem, session chairs reaching out to their presenters, and what are the guidelines for last minute changes from in person to remote, or the opposite?
I don't know. Jamie, do you want to say something?
Yeah, sure. So some people did change at the last minute. And so the file that I was talking about earlier that you would have access to, we try to wait as late as possible to give it to you. It's a manual process to put all the information together for us, but we try to make it as complete and accurate as we can as late in the process. But there are going to be changes that we don't catch. So I think you will have the contact information for that presenter. You can reach out to that person to confirm attendance method. But as soon as we know that they have changed from in-person to remote, they do receive a link as soon as we know. So sometimes they say they haven't received the link when they really have. They just haven't found it in their email or something like that. But we're going to simplify that process a little bit this year, but there will be some that we have to catch at the last minute.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so then there's a question in the chat that says, is LPI trying to balance the amount of remote versus in-person talks, or are speakers admitted purely based on their talks and topics? And the answer is, we told the program committee, pick what the science that you thought would make the strongest oral sessions and put them together without paying attention to whether it was in person or virtual. And then because we can accommodate both in-person and virtual oral presentations. So the method of presentation was not a consideration at the program committee. We simply chose the science that we thought made the strongest oral program. Okay, Anna Gulcher.
Good morning. So I only could join this meeting just now, so I apologize if this question has already been asked. But my question would be is related to giving introduction or rules for all the attendees and speakers. Are we as chairs able to make our own introduction slides, or is there anything general from LPSC, or is this just to be sort of mentioned?
We have not typically had slides from the session chairs at the beginning. I think that probably is one step too far. But you're certainly welcome and encouraged to say something at the beginning about how you see the session moving forward. It may be something about the science of the session. Certainly you'll want to go over the basic ground rules that we've covered in the training and here. And I think we typically send out like a one-pager of things that are worth saying at the beginning. But that's really, I think the thing is to simply say those things verbally. And if you get a spot where there's, say, a transition coming out of a Q&A where things wind down a little early, those kinds of rules of the road can be repeated plausibly a couple of times during a session, just to make sure people understand. For example, the rules, we talked about the rule about presenters had to ask not to have their work tweeted about or blogged about. That's worth repeating several times in a session just to make sure that everybody understands that rule. By the end of the week, people have heard it a bunch of times, but on Monday morning, if it's said, at the beginning of a session, at the end of the first Q&A, at the end of the second Q&A, or if some talk runs a little bit short, if it's repeated several times, I think that's actually a useful thing to get the major rules across.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Okay, I'm not seeing anything. So Justin, is there any last thoughts you would like to share?
No, just a reminder, sorry, I will see if my camera works. Just a reminder that we have the session chairs breakfast each morning. So if you have questions, come there. That's also a great place, especially if you're Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, that there's lessons learned from the previous days. My comment about laser pointers came up last year. So things like that. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, and we will see you at LPSC. And thank you again.
Moderators are also not just allowed at the breakfast. We actually want everybody to attend on the day that they're chairing a session chairs and moderators. It's not an optional ask. We really do want you there because there are always things that change. There are day-specific announcements that sometimes happen, for instance. So we really do want you to attend. It's important. It's not going to cover precisely the same material that we've been covering in this training. So please, we do want to see you on the morning of.
Oh, wait, sorry, I had a quick question.
Okay.
Recommended that we get in contact with the other members of the other chairs and moderators. Is there a list of emails of those people available just in case they're not first author on an abstract?
Yes, there is.
If they're on an abstract, we can find them, and we could maybe find an email that way, but if there's a list, that would be good.
Yeah, Caitlin, if you'll go back to the email that you received, where the link for the training session and the information about joining today's question and answer, there's also a link in there with to a Google file that has all of the session chair and moderator information in it. Or if it isn't in that email, it will be in one next week. I'm backtracking now because I can't remember if it was in the email, but you will get a link to the Google file that we are creating, and it's kind of a live thing, and we just keep updating with attendance method as we get that information.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. Jamie, anything else you'd like to say before we call it a day?
No, I think I wanted to point out, just for whether you are a session chair or a moderator, just remember there will be one laptop provided in the room at the session chair moderator table, and it's up to you and your co-session chair or moderator to figure out how you want to use that laptop. You can use it if you want to monitor online Q&A. You can use your own device and connect to the Wi-Fi, but it's there for your use and for the three of you to decide how best to use it, if at all.
Okay. With that, I think we're done. I see that Jeff Gillis just put, that must be the link to the spreadsheet that Jamie was referring to. I want to thank you for your time, for coming into this session, for watching the training video, for all you're doing to chair and moderate a session. You are in many ways the face of the conference for many people. And so I thank you for all you do to support LPSC. And we'll see you in less than 3 weeks. That's actually a little scary that it's getting that close, but thank you and have a good day.